the opportunity to ask our speakers the pertinent questions of the day. But before we do that, can I introduce the guy who made this all possible? He was the trade commissioner to London of the DTI and the trade attaché to Belgium before coming home to the Philippines, essentially to set this conference up. May I introduce Mike Ignacio of the Foreign Trade Service Corps of the DTI.
Thank you, Doy. I think that's an overstatement. I'm here on my home tour of duty, and I'm part of the Foreign Trade Service Corps of the Department of Trade and Industry. And with me is my co-lead for this event, Rico Mariano, who actually coined the word Slingshot, MNL. So he's right there. He's very unassuming, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Professor Dasher, Nico, JJ, and Justin, and of course our partners Earl and Minette. Good afternoon, friends from the media. We at the Department of Trade and Industry are very happy to be joined by all of you on day 2 of what will be surely a milestone in the history of the Philippine startup scene. I represent the Foreign Trade Service Corps of the DTI, the home office of all the Philippine commercial diplomats assigned in around 30 offices around the world. And as we in DTI work closely with the Philippine micro and small and medium enterprises and startups, it is very important to note that we in government see and value the amazing potentials, incredible talent, energy levels, level of innovation, and entrepreneurial drive of this ever-growing community of innovators and companies. When we started putting this together less than 2 months ago, we intended Slingshot MNL to be a showcase of all of the above, bringing together our most ingenious, forward-thinking entrepreneurs. The Philippines is a haven for creativity and our talent pool, and science and tech-enabled small and medium enterprises. And as we consistently work together to deliver our mandates in my department for trade and investment promotion in the context of inclusive growth for all, and as consistent with our APEC commitments for SME development. And we are getting there. Already, APEC economies account for 47% of the world trade and contribute 57% of global GDP. With a strong startup community among those segments driving economic growth, these trends can only go upwards. And we are very excited to be here. Many startups work to directly uplift the lives of communities and also, most importantly, empower even those who are traditional SMEs. And they also address multifaceted social, economic, and environmental concerns. So given our limited time to prepare for this event, it is no surprise that when we in government started to approach our partners in the private sector and the leadership of the Philippine startup community, such as Earl Valencia of Idea Space, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and other prime movers, such as Minette Navarrete of Kickstart, PSIA Spring PH, and our industry associations. And it is very important to note that these industry associations, although they are mainstream, they also have a segment that are startups in their memberships. PSIA, the Philippine Software Industry Association, the Call Center Association of the Philippines, and also the Game Developers Association of the Philippines. We see a number of their members here in our exhibit today. They immediately rallied to help us put these amazing 2 days together and hopefully work together to slingshot our amazing startups, innovators, and amazing talent pool to the world stage. Of course, with the help of our stellar cast of plenary speakers and panelists brought to us by our contacts in the business community. So again, on behalf of Secretary Domingo and our immediate supervising Undersecretary Ponciano Manalo of the DTI, my co-lead, Rico Mariano, who incidentally coined Slingshot MNL. Thank you very, very much for an amazing 2 days. We hope this is the start of something huge. Thank you.
Mike, can I ask you to join the panel, please? So as has been our tradition over the last 2 months, when we do press conferences, it's always been a panel because the insight being that this is a startup ecosystem that we are building. So let me introduce the panel. Obviously, the man who has been a prime mover in helping us set up this conference, Earl Valencia, who is the co-founder and president of IdeaSpace. Nicolas Shea, who, as the founder of Startup Chile, has really, I think, started a movement. And of course, Professor Richard Dasher, who, as the head of the US Asian Technology Center of Stanford, really has created this connection between the United States, specifically Silicon Valley, and a lot of the countries' startup ecosystems here in Asia. Of course, Minette Navarrete, again, another pillar, let's say, of the startup scene, without whose help we wouldn't have been able to set this up. Justin Hall, who is the principal of Golden Gate Ventures, one of the leading VCs here in Asia. And of course, JG Chai, who is the managing director of Airbnb. Okay, can I have the privilege to ask the first question? Mike said that we are looking at this event to be a milestone. In your minds, this is just a conference. What will truly make this event a milestone for the startup scene here in Asia? Earl?
So I guess when Mike and Rico approached us about 8 weeks ago about this conference, really surprised, but we had a grand vision, and it actually doesn't end in this conference, right? Our vision is how can all the sectors in the Philippines put really startups in really the mainstay light, right? As we can see, when we thought about this, I think we have 1,000 signups for this, and there was even a huge wait list to come in. So as much as we think that this is just a movement, which is just a very small movement, more and more people actually are getting interested and actually want to participate in creating things of their own and maybe things that the community values. So we hope that this really a start of building a community, not just from our own in the startup world, but reaching out also to the government. In fact, we just did an announcement yesterday with the DOST, DTI, and ICTO to create an innovation hub or district for the Philippines with the startup ecosystem. So again, this is not just something that is just a small sector. I think this could be one of the most strategic sectors that even our government in every single department should play a role in, because as probably what Nico would say later, and Professor Dasher and others, that this could contribute hugely to the GDP of the Philippines, maybe not next year, but we anticipate maybe in the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Professor Dasher?
So I do speak at a lot of conferences, and sometimes I wonder if nothing happens after the end of the conference. This time, I don't think so, because of the people who are involved in organizing this conference and also who are participating in the conference. It's great participation. It's been a very content-rich program. That's wonderful already. We depend on the press to get people excited about this and to communicate what happened to the 1,000 or so people here who are present. We are depending on that to reach a larger group. And then it's the follow-up activities. It is setting up some specific programs, and the key people who would be doing this kind of setup are here. That's really good. You can't promise that anything will happen, but I think the right people are involved, and so it will really be exciting to see what happens. I want to see the 5-year alumni reunion of the startup companies who are here.
Can I ask Justin, since you're a VC and you've probably done a tour of the startup exhibit, what are your views on that particular question?
It's interesting to be here, just to be here on the ground floor, because as I understand it, this is the largest collection of startups arranged for a conference in quite some time. And being here, it's almost being like on the ground floor of a very large movement, because when you consider ASEAN, it's a huge market. There's huge potential upside here. And this is the first step in fulfilling that potential. And so seeing these raw startups, yes, they're new, yes, they are very raw, but the potential for them to fulfill and meet the expectations of everyone here and the market, it's kind of exhilarating to see that. And I think this conference kind of represents that very, very well. Like, everyone here is at the beginning of a historic moment, not only for the Philippines, but where ASEAN will be in 10, 15, 20 years.
Annette?
I think when you look at the Southeast Asian region, we are underrepresented globally. We're underrepresented in innovation. We are underrepresented in investments. We are underrepresented in exits. You just have to look at the stats of venture funding, of angel funding, of corporate M&A, of IPOs, of patents filed, and you know that the Southeast Asian region, where we belong, doesn't have as much representation. It doesn't participate as much. But the world is changing. The world is becoming more global, more integrated. And given the technology that is available to everybody, it should not be the case that a lack of capital or the need for heavy industry is the barrier. So the hope for me is not that we keep this as a talk shop, that every year we come together and we say nice things. The hope is that every year we chart progress, and that the real milestones are not that we come together, but the milestones are that there are more companies, more entrepreneurs, more companies looped in and driving progress. Remember, this is the Asian century. This is the Asian millennium. We have got to do a lot more, and that's what I'm looking for.
JJ, can I ask for your
I like the theme about looking 5 years out ahead. I think if you look 5 years out ahead, without doubt, somewhere along this, with attendees or people who hear of this event, there would be a successful startup coming out of this from one way or another, right? Someone who sort of like, hey, I saw this Justin guy, I looked for him and found funding. I saw this Airbnb, Uber guy, they knew how to expand regionally. Or the professor somewhere from Stanford who can connect and find things. So I think somewhere along the way, all these kind of connections, you cannot plan it, but you play it 5 years out, I think it will come out with something down the road.
Of course, Nico Shea is the expert in this, right? So,
I was thinking. I mean, I have no idea, and I'm not here to be nice. You guys are doing something wrong, clearly, because the Philippines has everything to go quicker than it's going. You've got location, you've got climate, you've got size, you've got, and capital will come. Technology is a commodity. Talent is obvious that you have. So I would question, and I don't know the answer to that, but what are the things that are keeping the Philippines to capture that potential? And you guys have the answer. And you guys are the opportunity, and you guys are the main threat, because whatever is not going on, it's only you guys to blame. So whether something happens or not, it's totally up to you. Today I got an email this morning from the World Economic Forum, a report on the 15 fastest growing economies. And the Philippines is not in that list. And there's no reason for not to be there. Startup Philippines could be something, but this is an effort. It's a huge effort, and everyone is responsible to be part of that. It's government, it's private sector, is philanthropy, but it's all the things that need to be done are quite clear. So I think you have a great challenge in front of you, and if you do it, it could be quite quick actually to just transform a country like this one. So they say that's usually, innovation is really the buzzword, but it's really what's going on. What drives innovation is competition. So I would double click on how competitive your markets are, because the more open they are, the more innovation you'll see coming out of here.
Thank you, Nico. Can I open the floor to your questions? I'm sure you have a lot more interesting questions than for our panel. May I ask that you introduce yourself and the media outlet that you're with before asking the question?
Good afternoon. I'm Siegfried Delegado of Bloomberg News. I'd just like to ask our panelists, based on your experience, how important are government policies in providing a strong springboard for the startup scene? And if anyone from the government would like to answer another question, a lot of the people I talked to at the Innovation Hub and some people that I've encountered online, they're having problems with their, they're encountering problems, including lack of innovation and productivity credit, which are present in other ASEAN countries. How do you plan to address this, given that the government isn't really keen on any revenue eroding measures as well? I also want to ask whether there is any startup roadmap that you're planning to put in place.
Let me attempt to answer that on behalf of the government. Yes, there is a startup roadmap, and this is being headed by the DOST in partnership with the startup and our tech community. So Earl and Minette and the IT industry are all involved here. So we are coming up with that. I guess as to answer your other questions, the first step you mentioned mature models of support for startups and subsidies. I guess the first step is this event. So within our mandate and with this event, we are able to hit at least 5 birds in one stone. We have an impressive plenary conference with very valuable learnings and best practices from all over the world. We have an exhibit composed of 116 very high innovation, science and tech-enabled startups present, showing their levels of creativity and their products and services. We have 8 workshops here for addressed to the learnings of our startups, our entrepreneurs, our policymakers, our academe, and the other stakeholders of this ecosystem. And that is the first step. We hope to start and follow other models. Of course, that's why we have Nico here and the other leaders in the global startup community, because we absolutely want to learn how they have done it and done it right. So I guess the first step is really recognizing, and we are here to work with the private sector to continuously do this. So let's slingshot our startup scene. Thank you.
I think just to add on to this, the importance of government involvement is really a reflection of the strategy that is being followed to grow an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Like, you have a selection of different strategies. So in the United States, for example, the government might serve more as an umpire, setting rules and regulations and infrastructure on which the private sector can build this entrepreneurial ecosystem. You have more a developmental model, like in Southeast Asia, actually, where the government is taking more of a much more involved top-down approach, where they're fostering and implementing actual policies to catalyze the VC industry or to improve startup formation. And then I think Nico actually represents a very good model of the bottom-up approach, where it's just bringing in entrepreneurs, like bringing them in, giving them the tools that they need, and then that fosters almost an organic growth of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I think it really depends on, in terms of assessing how much government involvement you need, it really depends on what kind of strategy you're looking to follow. And I think in Southeast Asia, it's the top-down developmental model that seems to be the most common. And in this respect, the Philippines is actually pursuing that pretty well. And this conference is a good example of that, the government is actually looking to disseminate knowledge, to help support startups, to bring startups together and implement policies to help allow for that. So I think in Southeast Asia, the developmental model seems to be key, and the Philippines seems to be following that.
So creating and improving an ecosystem like this involves all three sectors. It does involve the government, that's essential. It involves the business community, that's essential. It involves the university community, that's essential as well. The danger is when one sector tries to do the other sector's business. And I really liked the model of Startup Chile, because what happened is the government did not over-specify what kind of profiles for companies it wanted to bring people in. It was really looking at people who could grow. And that, I think, is a real key. I think that government basically invests in the future of its people. And so its connection to the needs of its people is direct. It is also, one of the needs of its people is to have a robust educational community and a robust business community. So the interface between the two are very important. It's just important for the government to create a good environment, and then for the people in the business community to make the business decisions that will help the companies be successful.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to remember, there are a couple of myths about government, the role of government. First of all, there isn't a single playbook. There are different formulas for achieving different objectives, and the context of each country has to be taken into consideration when you create a national roadmap. So yes, I have seen a draft of the startup roadmap that is being produced. There are a number of back and forths in the discussion around how factually correct, etc. The other myth is that government is kind of a homogeneous block, and we, the citizens, are a part of it. We have to remember that the government is a government of the people, of its citizens. And so our participation is key to making things happen. And this is why I think when Professor talks about the role of media, that is absolutely critical, because we have to talk about what needs to be done. We need to create the interest in the startups. This isn't going to bubble up overnight. I think private sector has a role, I think public sector has a role, but you do not have a great community, a great startup ecosystem, if not everybody is doing their part. So that's an important thing to remember when we talk about government. I'm a firm believer in, set the policy environment, but the government should not take over, should not do the investing, should not spoon feed. Ultimately, if you want to be excellent in the real world, you cannot be spoon fed.
So I guess, if there's also another message I think to say today about Slingshot and also working with the government is that we have to encourage more participation from every sector, and some challenges I think that we can pose, right? So some challenges we can do is, for example, I think today, because especially the DTI is actually leading it, there's actually a lot of conversations now with the DTI on how to make an enabling environment for early stage technology companies, because I think even before last year when they had this conversation to revise it, technology startups was never even in the list of the investment priority plans of the Philippines. But I think we're working now with the DTI to actually change some language so that if you're a young startup entrepreneur, at least give you a little bit of a chance to think about should you have a tax break, should you think about not spending on the tax of your certain employees, right? So I think those are the challenges that we're posing. Perhaps more investment in shared service facilities, right? I mean, that's something that we could do. With the Department of Science Technology, I think we can also challenge in order for them to have an environment to commercialize the R&D. But again, these are just two departments among all the departments in the Philippines. How can we make the government also a huge customer of early stage innovations, right? So that's, again, one challenge. And also from the private sector, we have a lot of large conglomerates in the Philippines. In fact, Minette and I represent two of some of the largest conglomerates. I was from First Pacific, Minette's from the Ayala Group. But where else are the other ones, right? Where are the larger corporations support the, these innovators, these entrepreneurs who, have not big businesses, but maybe they could help them. So we also want and encourage a lot of large businesses to have their own innovation and startup strategy, because we need a community also of the large private sector to come together with us. I think the academia world, a lot of students are interested in this. So we just have to have an environment that all sectors are challenged because of today's event. And basically say, yeah, we're going to do it, right?
I would agree with everything, and I would just add two things. I don't know if the same applies here, but in Chile, in the government, there was sort of this attitude, it's like a confrontation between government and business, and there's so many things that make it hard for an entrepreneur starting a company, taxes, all the laws, regulations, etc. And within government, what we did, one of the things we did, there's a semantic thing, and we took our time, and we had talks with the innovation team. We ran talks and conferences within other departments of the government, to understand that, what's the tax rate here, the corporate tax rate? 32%. 32%. So the government is the main partner of every single Filipinian company. They own 32% of the equity, and they're the first one to get paid. So it's ridiculous to think that the government, so the governments end up being the only investor in the world that don't want their companies to prosper quickly. So when you think about yourself as the main investor, the main partner in every single company, then of course you want them to prosper and to grow and create wealth, because all of that surplus a third of it will come to you. And I think that gave an enormous amount of speed, and so that shifted in many respects the view of privileging the incumbents to put an eye on the insurgents or the new guys in town, the entrepreneurs. And the only way to achieve development, as Richard says, is working together. There's no other way. I mean, you need these three, or maybe you can add a fourth. And you guys play a huge role in the press. You have so much work to do, and tell the stories of entrepreneurs as much as you can, and make them become like this very public figures, so everyone can relate to them. That's you guys. So I would say there are four sectors.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, let me just tell you that insight that the government is the biggest shareholder, that's mind-blowing. It's just amazing. Okay, questions, please. Yes, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Ross Del Rosario from whatsupfilipinas.com. This question is for Nicholas. Earlier you mentioned that you're not here to be nice and you find something wrong. And you mentioned a little while ago that one of that is the corporate taxes, something like that. So what else?
I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that?
Earlier you mentioned that the corporate taxes
Oh,
is
yeah.
one, probably one of the wrongs. Can you mention other wrongs that you find here in the country? Can you be more specific? when you-
Well, I've been 30 hours in the Philippines, and after a 30-hour flight, so I have no idea.
Then
really
what were
to-
you saying that about the wrong something? We're doing something wrong.
Because there must be, because if you
Okay.
the per capita income in this country is $4,000, $5,000. So and a developed country is like at 20,000. That's what the economists say. And when I see you got everything, you've got size, you've got location, you've got technology. Everyone has it. So if you're not where you would like to be, then there's something you must be doing wrong. I have no idea what that is. You need to figure that out. That's your job.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Amy from Inquirer. You mentioned a while ago regarding the need to create a good or a conducive policy environment in the Philippines. Can you expound more on that? Sir Earl mentioned about maybe the inclusion in the IPP and granting of tax breaks, but overall, what kind of picture do we need to see to make it more feasible to startups, or at least make it more possible for them to succeed? Thank you.
Yes, Minette, you want to start?
So I can start by saying, to do that, you have to look at what kind of environment do we want for startups. So we want an environment where innovation is possible. Innovation is only possible when there is experimentation and when it's easy to start up and it's easy to fail without social repercussions, without financial repercussions. You want an environment where there is access to capital of different sorts. So it doesn't have to be big VC money from the beginning. There are angel networks, angel investors. So you need all those to be possible. You need an environment where diversity is present, because the diversity of perspectives, of ideas, of talent, of skill bases is what's necessary in order to create a thriving community. And you need something where mobility is possible, where people can move from one place to another. So you start with that, and then you think about what are the specific policies that perhaps were created at a time when startups had not even been contemplated. Because the laws that we have are the laws that were created from the last constitution, 87. And some of them date back to the 50s, right, post-war. So what are the things that we have now that we want? And I would posit that tax is the easy thing to say, but not just tax for the startups, tax for investors, for example. Make a better investment climate, make it possible to bring in different kinds of investors is a start. And obviously that's selfish, right? We invest. But make it possible for people to start. I think the NCC, the National Competitiveness Council, has done a great job working with the DTI and a number of other government agencies to move from 18 steps to 8 steps, and to move from 45 days to 16? 16 days to register a business. How do you deregister a business? Has anyone tried? That takes a long time as well. So you begin to think about those things. I think visas need to be eased up. So that's kind of a start. I'm sure Justin and everyone else on the panel will have some pet policies that they'll want to suggest.
So I can only, well, I really try to view ecosystems from the point of view of an investor, and I think that's where I can provide the most value. Every ecosystem has a specific pipeline going from pre-seed all the way to growth stage funding. And the funny thing about the Philippines, and again, this touches on Nico's point, is that there are so many good things about the Philippines that are far better than its neighbors. And one of the biggest things there that I've seen as an investor is the seed funding. Like, you have Kickstart, you have IdeaSpace, these are corporate VCs, these are coming from corporates, and the success rate, the number of companies they've incubated, the entrepreneurs they've educated, that's really rare to see that at that scope in Southeast Asia. And so on the seed side, I think on the early stage of the pipeline, it's actually quite strong. So where I would see some improvement being required is what happens to those entrepreneurs after they leave the incubator, after they leave those accelerators. Because if there's a gap there, it doesn't matter how robust the funding is down the pipeline, it doesn't matter how robust the pipeline is at the early stage. If there's a gap, they're gonna fall through. And I think the Philippines has excelled actually at the early stage. But what happens after that? I think that's a question that needs to be answered now.
So, and it's not my words, probably yours, Nico, right? So I think I have two, I don't know, I guess, pet recommendations. But when Nico spoke a while ago, he talked about that Startup Chile was a cultural accelerator, right? So I think if there's even, one thing is how can we actually, empower, more young people to think about this if they want to actually think that it's possible. Again, in Idea Space, we do about close to 100 events per year. In fact, Gold this year we do about, flies around every weekend. 100 events per year from almost every part of the Philippines. And actually, everywhere we go, there's at least 100, if not more than that, sometimes 1,000 people show up in our events. Young people, professionals to say, you know what, this startup revolution, it's nothing to get around, but we hear about it and we're very interested because this could be our path away from poverty, right? These are the stories, it's real. So how can private sector and the government and academia can work together? Because we have to be a nation of believers. A believer that, if someone was born, you can chart your own destiny. And I think that is the startup mindset. So again, how can you create a cultural acceleration? Maybe through, again, a tripartite solution, especially with the government leading it. The other one is about stages, right? How can you make, for example, at that stage, right, at the research stage, to encourage more people to do research, from the research to commercialization, or your student thesis project to commercialization, how can we get more support for that, right? And obviously for each stage after that. But even for us in Idea Space, we get 1,000 applicants, so we can only accept 10. Again, we get an applicant from every region in the Philippines, including ARM and CAR, 1,000 of them in the Philippines, right? So again, it is a nation, little by little, people want to do this. But we can't do it alone. We have our own corporate limitations, right? I mean, we can't fund, not like Startup Chile, Startup Chile funds, what, 150, 200?
300 per year.
300 per year, right? So the government of Chile pays 300 startups per year to start. We can't do that in Idea Space because we have our corporate limitations. So just imagine if, again, the 1,000 already existing, if we can fund even 10% of that or 5% of that, how many more entrepreneurs would achieve, at least believe that they can achieve their dream, right? So again, it's up to us, but I think we need to work all together. I think Slingshot is a great way to have that conversation.
Mike?
So you mentioned the investments priorities plan, and let me add the PEDP as well, the export development plan. I think the beauty of this system, in our system in government, is that the IPP and the PEDP, we are able to make adjustments every year or so. And I guess that's one of the main takeaways of this event. Learning from the best practices from all over the world, and learning from the needs that are identified in this event. And I guess, well, yesterday we started with a keynote from my boss, Secretary Domingo, and today we started again with a keynote from DOST Secretary Montejo. And they are really out there in recognizing the gaps. And I guess that's the first step. The gaps are being recognized. And I guess it's our job in government and our partnership with the private sector and with the guidance of those that have done it elsewhere, to make adjustments. And so that's our commitment to you. We are learning, and we will continue to make it as conducive for business growth in line with our inclusive growth agenda and our trade and investment promotion mandates.
So if you pick the doing business index, there's like those rankings. Just understand all categories and excel in everyone. And you need to do it all and fix, but what's interesting, when I just took the job as an innovation advisor 5 years ago, we were in Stanford campus actually, and we had a lunch with one of the professors. And so I told the group that I was going back to Chile. And after the lunch, a guy comes to me and says, you know what's your problem in Latin America? You know, you Latin Americans? And I'm talking for Latin Americans, but I suspect since we were both colonized by Spaniards, it'll be similar in the Philippines. But he said, you know, you know what your problem is? I don't, please tell me. And he said, you guys, you lack the FU attitude. I said, could you, keep on? That's very interesting. He said, yeah, because, here in the US, in Silicon Valley, and the hubs, innovation hubs, basically, you want to do something, you have an idea, you saw a problem, you have a solution, you just do it. And if someone gets on the way, you just say F you and you do it anyway. And, but you guys, you're full of restrictions. And you were born and everyone told you that you will, you had to be this because where you were born determines where you should die. And basically it's like right in the same place. And you pick a different industry and those are, this family, that family. And there's a joke in Latin America that they say Latin America doesn't have countries, it has country clubs. Again, I'm just speaking for Latin America. So that attitude is so important. And you can talk about innovation and all the cool business models, but the truth is in Latin America, if the guys that want to do, replicate Airbnb and Uber, peer-to-peer lending entrepreneurs are threatened with jail. And the big corporations, big incumbents don't want things to happen. The other day I'm teaching a class in entrepreneurship, and there was this big telecom company who sponsored the contest. And he said, and his question was, what happens if one of the winners is a competitor of mine? And he wanted to, censor it. He's like, you're kidding me. So these things go every day. And again, it's, it all comes back to Schumpeter. I don't know if you should read Schumpeter. It's very enlightening. It's creative destruction. There will be no innovation, there's no evolution without destruction. And the incumbents don't like that very much. So think about that. I think that's important to think about.
I'm actually a seat warmer here for my other boss, Undersecretary Nora Terrado, who is also a stalwart of the Philippine IT scene. So Undersecretary, please take my place, rightly so. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm sure you have more questions, especially that Undersecretary Terrado is here. Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Bernie of Manila Bulletin. To Professor Dasher. Sir, if I remember it right, your presentation yesterday, you said that 90% of the startups in Silicon Valley were funded by angel investors or venture capital. I think the fund you mentioned was $14 billion. Do you think, or do you have an idea of how much do you think the Philippines should come up with a pool of fund for the startups to, to tap, or just like what you have in the Silicon Valley?
Thank you. First of all, I want to correct the data a bit. The 90% was how much of California angel investments were happening in Silicon Valley. The point there is just that there is a lot of angel investment money. That is a benefit to Silicon Valley. The benefit to that is that it makes it more competitive among investors to get the best startup companies, to have the opportunity to invest in a startup company. So from the standpoint of the entrepreneur, it means you get better terms for your investment. One of the distinctive features of angel investment is that the angel investors typically cannot get a personal guarantee from the entrepreneur to repay the investment funds. If you have to borrow money from a bank to start a company, you will have to pay that money back, even if it comes from your personal assets. So that is a structural feature to watch out for. It's good to have angel money in a system. Now, that's the general principle. In terms of the balance that you need for the best possible system, if there is so much money in the system that it's easy for someone to get investment money, too many second-rate plans will be funded. So there is some sort of a sense in which you don't want things to get too easy, right? But the point is that angel investment money offer entrepreneurs a less risky approach to start a company at the very beginning than does a bank loan. And that is a benefit. I think that having a good pool of active angel investors is important to an innovation-based economy. But just how much that is, that gets back to what Michael was talking about, the continual adjustment. The system will do a lot of self-adjusting. Right now, valuations are going up in Silicon Valley because there's so much money. And so the entrepreneurs are asking for too much money for a particular value company, right? That is one of the system will continually adjust itself, but the government really needs to watch out for the availability of multiple sources of income and watching the balance as a function for the government.
Maybe that's a question we can ask to Undersecretary Tirado as well. Coming from the software industry, what are your views on funding, for instance, startup funding?
You know, having experienced starting a business and eventually selling it off. So comparing the time that we have now, I mentioned yesterday that we are in fact more lucky, more fortunate today that we have various methods and sources of funding. You have angels coming here, you have venture capitalists, and you have all sorts of hybrid equity contributors to starting a business. And whereas before, when we're starting a business, especially in building a software, we really have to dole out from our own pockets. And I mentioned yesterday family, friends, and some of those people I mentioned fools, but this is a terminology that has been said. So there's more formality right now, and there are more crowdsourcing that's happening. But I must say that in the Philippines, this is in the early stages, if I may say, and we need to really formalize the community of funders so that those that has a value proposition in terms of software that can be brought to the international markets can now can attract investors. So I believe that today the access to capital is much more prominent, I would say, that the banks and financial institutions would have more, I'd say, appetite to lend money to fund a project, to build a product. And still, in terms of access to funding by way of equity or by way of loan or a hybrid thereof, there's still a lot of necessary improvements that must happen. For example, the collateral that must back it up, the guarantees that will have to take place. But I must say that funding an idea is not just in software. today, with a lot of problems to solve in the world, there's such a thing as innovation in terms of, say, maybe I'd say medicine, the area of medicine, the area of environmental protection, in the area of improving processes. So I suppose in this desk there are people who are angels. I tried to be an angel, but I am a small angel, and that's the reason why the crowdsourcing idea is something that I think should be introduced in the market. Very early stages, but we're starting it in the Philippines. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? We have time for one more question.
Hi, good afternoon. Alex Villafania for Startup Machine. Well, basically, we do understand that the startup community or ecosystem in the Philippines is just starting up, to say the least. But we do know that money still flows from big companies, and that's the type of money that we need for these startups. But for those trying to attempt to become angel investors, seed providers, how do you approach them and prevent them from expecting too much from entering this type of business? Of course, the likes of Globe and Smart have already understood the concept, but given the propensity of big businesses to suddenly jump into the bandwagon and start giving out money and expecting that all 10 of their investments would come back to them tenfold, how do you help them manage their expectations? I mean, this is just going beyond using the media as a platform for informing them.
Hey, Alex, that's a great question. I think there is a bit of investor education that has to happen. Certainly for ourselves, Kickstart's pretty outspoken when we think that some investors ask for too much. I mean, the basic things, investors want a guarantee that the money will come back. Well, the global stats are 96% of startups will fail. So the odds are not in favor of the money coming back. The terms tend to be soft, and you don't want to take too much equity, particularly when something is very, very early stages. You don't want to take more than 15% because a startup is a long way to go. So if you give a lot of cash, that's one thing. And even then, so people need to learn, and there is a role for investor education. Some of that will come from media, and that means from the media side, do the research, ask the questions, go beyond the flashy headline that is clickbait. The other thing is also obviously for the investors to educate themselves. So Justin and I were talking outside about how sometimes we have turned away great teams, great ideas, because structurally the first investor took too much. And there isn't enough skin in the game for the founder. And that's not, you're right, it's not typical corporate practice, but it is typical investment practice. It is good investment practice. So it's important to understand what is good, what is bad, and for founders to say, no, you're asking for too much, and to walk away. It is as much the founder's decision whose money to accept. Not all money is the same. Cash is a commodity. There is plenty of cash. But you have to be able to say yes to the right things and no to the wrong things.
I just wanted to add on to this because this was a very, very good question. There are some documents in the United States which are quite well known because they almost impose a sort of standard as to what's appropriate. And those are like KISS documents or SAFE documents where, I don't say every startup subscribes to it, but there's so much knowledge dissemination in the United States because it's one market. It's been around, or VC has been around for 30, 40 years, so people understand what's good and what's not. In Southeast Asia, VC is still relatively new. So there are some angels that are deliberately predatory, and there are some angels that just don't know what they're doing, and they impose terms that to them are entirely normal, but to a startup, they kill the startup the moment they sign that check. So what needs to happen in Southeast Asia is there needs to be a standard put in place, and it hasn't happened yet, but it is happening now. And as media, I think it's your responsibility to identify those trends now, because they will be, I don't want to say it's going to be a paradigm shift, but it will be so helpful in leveling the playing field, not just for Filipino entrepreneurs in country, but for entrepreneurs across the region. And I'm a big fan of them, and I'm a big proponent of what they're doing. But 500 startups, simply because they invest everywhere, their documents are relatively the same across Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and so on and so forth. So they're just by right are introducing standards into the market. And I think these standards need to be accepted more or less by many investors across the region, and that will be extremely helpful in actually getting everyone on the same playing field and making sure that the terms are fair initially and going forward.
Yes, Nico.
5 years ago in Chile, everyone complained that there was no capital available and that investors were too picky. What we did with the entrepreneurs, we did I don't know if you remember, it talked about the demo days, and after every cohort, we would do a demo day, and then we did a demo day in Santiago, and then we added one in New York and in San Francisco. And guess what? The investors came to us furious, complaining that we were taking away entrepreneurs from them, while they were not really willing to, they were not taking the risk. They were living on government subsidies. 5 years later, 30% of the startups are being funded. Like $140 million of private money have gone into Startup Chile startups. 80% of that is outside money. So you need to think about the world in global terms. It's unbelievable, but it's for the entrepreneur drives, the train. Capital will come in a heartbeat. It came to Chile. Think about it. It'll become much quicker to the Philippines. Focus on the entrepreneur, and capital is going to get here. Don't start with capital. Capital doesn't drive ideas. Ideas drive capital.
Yes, Professor Dasher.
I'm agreeing with everything. I want to point out that there is a continuum of different kinds of investment. Almost always a company starts with friends and family money. That's universal. If you don't have somebody that you know who's willing to invest in your idea, you probably don't have a very good idea. The angel investment is typically the first professional investment in a company. An angel investor is investing their own assets, not the assets that they've accumulated from limited partners. There is a need for angel investors to be willing to invest not only money, but it's their knowledge. It's their ability to see the new vision that really make them attractive. They need to be mentors for the new company. And so you really have to look at where the investors come from as well. Just being wealthy does not qualify you to be an angel investor, in my opinion. You really have to be able to see the vision and understand the process and understand the pain of starting up the company. Venture capital is later stage. Most big company money really comes in relatively late in the process when the company becomes interested in the startup company for potential strategic reasons, to be a strategic partner or to be a customer of the big company or to be a supplier to the big company. The job of the entrepreneur is to manage these relationships. It's really wonderful when an entrepreneur can walk away from an investor and say, no, I don't need this. This is not right for me. So you need multiple sources, exactly as you said.
Earl, I'm interested in your views, especially as an early stage investor and as a foundation.
So I'll do another challenge, right? It's not necessarily to large corporate, but to another segment who are, I think, the potential, angels of the Philippines. One is the small and medium-sized entrepreneur who's relatively made it, but they're the founder or one of the kind of founding families. Why? Because perhaps, for example, if you are a new application in advertising, for example, advertising is a revenue model, why can't someone who actually has been in advertising or maybe owns a large advertising agency become one of the, early angel investors? Number one, it de-risks himself because he knows the space, right? And then number two, it's good strategic advice for the company, right? Another one, which is extremely untapped, is people who probably are in high positions or executives that maybe can spare some hours on the weekend, but they have high net worth, they have huge bonuses, rather than to maybe spend it on another condo somewhere, right? Mutual fund perhaps, I don't know, but why can't you then help out someone in your core expertise, right? So in idea space, we're fortunate enough, we've been actually, some rounds of investments after us came from these small, actually maybe not small, but medium-sized founder entrepreneurs that they said, this is my way to actually, first of all, diversify from my own, my own future, but at the same time, this actually helps me mentor someone that I think is in the same space as me. In fact, I actually invested in one of our classmates, Ventures, who's now one of the one of the leading online learning, platforms in India. He's one of our classmates, and he said, Earl, I want you to come in, mainly because you understand emerging markets, right? So that's the type of conversations you need to have, and that's the type of conversation I'm encouraging every entrepreneur that I have, because VC is not the only money you need. You need strategic advice. Right, so that's the stuff that we need, and we have actually a lot of these entrepreneurs in the Philippines. And we have to convince them to say yes because that's their core expertise. Why not, right?
Yeah, I want to say something. The best kind of funding is actually a customer's cash. So we have to stop thinking that the only measure of success is the ability to raise third-party funding. If somebody can bootstrap and make money out of it and never need to approach a VC, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And we need to be open to that. We need to think that. But I do want to emphasize the point Professor Dasher made about founders and supporting the entrepreneurs. So in our portfolio, we see, for example, M Clinica, whose founder Farouk. We funded him last year. He's expanded from Philippines to Vietnam. He's looking at another market. He's invested in somebody who's much less experienced than him. So he invested in Medix. Or Richard Eldridge, who's co-founder of Lendo. So he's invested in loan solutions of JP Bisson. And John Dang, who is one of the founders of ZipMatch, also invested in loan solutions. So it is important that we constantly support the founders, the entrepreneurs. And as Professor Dasher says, they support each other. Part of what you're after is an ecosystem that has that sort of collaboration, not only in terms of the cash. The more important thing actually is the market access, the introductions, the sharing of resources, and the collaboration. That's what we're after. That's what we want to create. If we want a sustainably successful ecosystem, we have got to create the ability to build those kinds of bridges.
I want to ask JJ a question simply because Airbnb was at one point a startup that approached so many VCs and were rejected. In fact, it's interesting because I heard a story that Giorgio Flores' accelerator was at one point approached.
Yeah, and this is, I think, echoes a lot of the similar themes, right? Like, fundamentally, it's a lot to do with the entrepreneur themselves to really persist and get through it. I mentioned yesterday, at some point in time, they funded themselves through credit cards, literally their own credit cards, a whole binder full of it. And when they didn't have enough money, they had to sell cereals to pay back the debts on the credit card. And somewhere along the way, they finally got through to a little bit of seed funding through to YC. But I don't think these guys ever went around and said like, hey, the government isn't doing enough for me to have a successful startup. They just had a problem to solve. They felt they had a great idea. They believed in themselves and persisted to get it done. And I feel like the ones that really get through the difficult, like in spite of all the challenges and get through it, these are the ones that are going to be the ones that really succeed in the real world, not the ones that are funded to death and given all a sort of silver platter to get there and becoming your national champions and so on. I think the ones that succeed despite the challenges are the ones that are going to be world-changing.
Any more questions? Okay. Before we end our press conference, can we have a photo op with our speakers, please? Okay, Nico, yes.
Just an idea, but coming from Latin America, you're the only Asian country with Spanish roots, and you're getting rid of a language that's being spoken, I don't know, 500 million, 700 million people in the world. You should consider talking to your grandparents before they pass away and getting the Spanish back. Being a bridge between, Latin America and Asia could be a pretty good, super good idea. I don't know.
Man, amazing. English and Spanish, why not?
Trilingual.
Trilingual, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Nico. That's a huge. I've counted 3 amazing insights from you today. It's mind blowing. Okay, photo op, please.
We stand up or sit down?
Yes, we sit down and then we can do another one standing up.
Formal stand.
Yeah. Yeah. One more. Can I ask the founders of Slingshot MNL to join our speakers? Thank you very much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending our press con today. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Please partake of our lunch.